So welcome everyone. I'm going to switch over to our presentation. So just give me just a moment. And just give me a yes if you could see the presentation.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. All right. So today's topic is responding to grief and loss, with a particular emphasis on how best we can support our students through this challenging time. So we're going to spend about the first 45 minutes, I'd say, roughly, focusing on content and information that we want to share with you. And then the last 10 to 15 minutes we'll dedicate toward Q&A. And so um, just to sort of lay the foundation down, today's presentation focuses on better understanding our students' emotional and behavioral response to grief and loss, and most importantly, how it impacts their learning in the classroom. So we'll spend time discussing how students are responding, some of our experiences at the Wellness Center that we've seen in the last 2 or so months. We also want to spend time explaining the stages of grief for both our students, but also for our own knowledge. All of us are going through this. All of us have at some point dealt with loss, and we'll talk about the different types of loss today. And then we also want to provide some coping strategies that you can apply to your own life, but also share with students that you're working with. So we'll get started first by talking about what we are grieving. And as I just mentioned, there are all different things that we have lost over these last few months. One of them being changes in our daily habits and routines. Um, over the last 2 months, our students have made a major transition from being in person, seeing their peers, seeing their professors, participating on campus through clubs and organizations, to suddenly having to be home. And I'll also mention that goes for all of us as well. We're no longer seeing our coworkers in person. And so our whole routine has changed. Even getting to work, our routine has changed from, waking up to getting ready for work, to getting to work, and so forth. So we've seen just a major transition in all of our lives over the past few months. And this has impacted, I'll speak personally for myself, this has impacted our sleeping habits, how my wife and I eat each day, as well as our exercise habits. And with exercise in particular being something important for me, having to move away from going to a gym and exercising almost on a daily basis to having to make that adjustment to exercising less and then figuring out how to exercise at home. But for our students in particular, again, this has been a huge transition for their daily routine. And I also mentioned for our students, they're no longer able to be on campus and to engage with their peers and to participate in the college experience. Um, so they're not seeing friends any longer. They're not participating in possible clubs or events. Um, they're not communicating in person anymore. So the transition to communicating virtual um, has been a major transition from what we've learned over the few months in communicating with our students. Some have difficulty being engaged through Zoom or WebEx. Um, and then lastly, the fact that we may not be able to see our loved ones has also been a major part of the grieving process. Um, for our students, again, maybe they're not able to connect with family members they're not living with, so aunts and uncles or parents. Um, Special plans and events that have been canceled. The most notable here is our upcoming graduation. As we all know, this was the time of the year where our students were celebrating their hard work over the last 2, 3, maybe more years and participating in our big graduation. Um, we've had to move away from that and do things again through a virtual world. And so it'd be interesting to see how this year's graduation is going to be and how it's going to feel different than in past years. And along with that, also, we recently had a holiday, Memorial Day, that just passed us. And for a lot of us and our students, maybe not being able to see family members. So we've gone through a few holidays recently, and the difficulty with not being able to be connected in person with family and friends. And then other celebratory events, weddings, communions, confirmations, other religious events we've had to see get canceled or postponed. I think this is probably the most important bullet for all of us, the idea of a loss of safety. So much has been shared through the news over the last few months, and with that has created so much uncertainty about our future and how, again, dramatically things have changed. There isn't a sense of necessarily things are going to be okay. We're sort of still in the middle of all of it. So for our students, again, just the fear of the unknown is very apparent in the work that we're doing at the Wellness Center. And then also with that, the idea of, what if I get sick? What if I get COVID? What if a parent gets COVID? Am I going to lose these people? Is my health going to be forever changed for the worse? And so a lot of fear again over the last few months in connection to a feeling of lack of. And then with that, a loss of identity, decrease in self-esteem. And so, the question that I wrote down here is, who am I if I'm not connected to family, to friends, if I'm not engaged in participating on campus or at work, if I'm cut off from, where I go to pray, houses of worship, if I'm cut off from all that, then who am I? And so again, I'm sure at some point, all of us, including our students, have had those questions in mind, and it's impacted their self-esteem and their self-worth and how, again, they feel about their future. A big one now that we're sort of in the middle of this pandemic, the unemployment rate today, I believe, was at 14%. So, just the idea of job loss. Some of our students have lost their jobs. They were students who were employed at restaurants, in hotels, not, working any longer. And, what does the future look for these industries? And again, for all of us, what does the future look in terms of employment? Well, we have to make an adjustment to our career path. And so I'll give you an example. I have my father-in-law who has been in the dry cleaning industry for all of his life, 30 plus years. And now seeing that people aren't going to work, they're working from home, there really isn't a need for dry cleaning, right? Because you're not wearing your business attire, you're more casual at home. So having to rethink career path. Now, for our traditional age students, that are graduating, perhaps they're graduating with a degree that may not be a need for at this point in terms of employment. So having to rethink career path is another part of what we're all grieving. And then lastly, and most importantly, the idea of losing a loved one. I could speak for myself. I've lost loved ones throughout the last 2 months, numerous people, and it's been very difficult. As we know, we've lost people at LaGuardia, we've lost colleagues, but also students due to the COVID-19, and it's been a very difficult time for everyone. And I think that the most difficult part has been the inability to fully grieve. to be, attending a wake or a funeral, and to have that ability to mourn the one that you've lost, and to be around loved ones who support you through this time. So really difficult if you've lost someone during this time. And so a little bit more about what we are experiencing as a community, both at LaGuardia, but also in New York and beyond. Um, due to the lockdown in New York specifically, um, this, I guess, longer term lockdown, we've had to deal with family challenges. And so we've heard from students um, the difficulty of being around family 24/7, not having privacy to fully engage in classes, um, not being able to engage in counseling. So we've heard that on numerous occasions. Um, Students don't have the privacy. They're sharing a studio apartment with family members, and there's no way to participate in a private counseling session. So we've had to, at the Wellness Center, sort of pivot and rethink how we can best provide services in a way that's going to work for students who don't have that privacy. The other side of the coin is not seeing family. Again, if you're living away from parents or siblings, the fact that you may not have been, not be able to see them over the last several months is really difficult. So we've heard, both challenges from students over these last few months. And I also want to mention in this bullet here, we've also have received reports from students who are dealing with domestic violence during this time. If you've been keeping up with the news, there's been an uptick in the number of domestic violence cases that are going on nationwide. And so, for our students, going to LaGuardia and escaping from home was, a way to manage a bad relationship, a violent relationship. To have to be home with your partner who is abusive really presents so many challenges. And this is, again, some of the feedback that we've gotten from our students. And also to mention, we have students and colleagues who are living alone, perhaps, and haven't had contact with family or friends in months. We have, within the Wellness Center, several colleagues who are living alone. And, that presents its own set of challenges, feelings of isolation, and then what emotions that brings up, feeling alone, feeling like you don't have anyone in your life. And so this is something else that students are reporting at the Wellness Center as well. And as I mentioned earlier, the idea of not feeling secure about your job, not feeling secure about the future employment, what that presents. We've had, again, students who have reported to us that they've lost their job, and this raises a lot of anxiety about paying the bills, right? So just a number of different concerns have arisen in the last few months that we're hearing a lot from our students at the Wellness Center. And, again, the idea that if I don't have a job, if I'm not connected with family and friends, if I can't get back to campus, what does the future hold for me? And, fear that things are going to be different, that we won't go back to our old ways, and sort of experiencing this new normal. Will things ever be the same again? And I think, again, this is a fear for all of us. But if you're living alone and you've lost your job and you're cut off from your family, these fears, these emotions that come up are magnified. And this bullet here about anger, I just want to note here that at some point, I would imagine all of us have experienced a range of emotions, one of them being anger. Um, Anger about the lack of clarity and direction of our government, getting different information each day. And early on, we were told that masks weren't helpful, and then that changed not too long after. Um, just a range of different information that could be confusing and can bring up anger for both ourselves and our students. So just not getting that guidance and support that's needed in times of crisis. And again, just to reiterate, all of us on some level are experiencing worry and concern about ourselves, but also our loved ones. If you have family members or friends with compromised immune systems or who are elderly, these are the more vulnerable populations from what we're learning. Are these people going to be okay? Can they ever go outside? Should we be around them during these times? And so again, more questions uh, are being raised as we are sort of in the middle of all this. And the worry is very much present for all of us. So we'll transition here to some of the signs that we should be paying attention to in terms of signs of grief. Um, Early on, I think, again, for most of us, there were feelings of shock, um, disbelief about what was happening. For me, I would often reference feeling like I was in a sci-fi movie and that this wasn't real, that this was surreal in many ways. So that initial feeling of shock and disbelief was there. And I think as we progressed, and I'll speak for myself, as I progressed, sort of doing my best to wrap my head around it and then sort of moving away from feeling or feelings, not wanting to connect with what was happening. And then again, this is not a linear um, stage of feelings, but for me, again, it happened to work out that, there were feelings of sadness that occurred mixed with anger and anxiety throughout this time. And it's still there. Um, we all have good days and bad days, but again, I go back to the unknown. Not knowing where we're headed is probably what's most concerning. And with that, when our feelings and emotions are heightened and we're in a stage of fear, it's often really difficult to focus on our normal tasks. Um, and so for our students, and again, Regina and I have witnessed this, for some of our students, the fact that their emotions are so high has made it really difficult for them to be engaged and participating in their classes. As a result, we've seen students who have withdrawn altogether from all of their classes, or who are no longer really as participatory as they once were. Maybe they're late for their assignments, not as engaged as they once were. And so this is, again, an experience that we're seeing at the Wellness Center. And then from a personal experience, yeah, at times it is difficult to be fully connected to our work, our tasks with work when you're worried about loved ones or you're getting new news that's of concern. Um, so these feelings are really very much at the forefront for all of us. And we'll talk a little bit more in a bit about how to manage these feelings as we continue to go through these next few months. For some of us, we may not experience the emotions connected to what we're going through, but we may experience it through our physical self. So it may manifest through headaches or an upset stomach, perhaps feeling tired. And I have family members who often get headaches, and it's usually connected to stress or experience a bad stomach that's usually connected to an upcoming stressful event. And so I think it's important for us to be mindful of this, that, there may be students or colleagues who say that they're fine, but then they share with you that they've been experiencing health issues that's impacting their work. And again, this is also important to note, specifically when it comes to cultural differences. Uh, Within some cultures, that they may not, it might not be part of the culture to speak openly about how one is feeling, that's kept private, but it may manifest again in the form of physical symptoms. So that's something also to note when we work with our students and also engage with our colleagues. Something else to be mindful of is that for many of us, we've experienced grief in our life, whether it be the loss of a loved one or having dealt with a really hard time in our life. Um, these experiences may resurface, or the feelings may resurface with what we're dealing with now. So if you've dealt with mental health issues in the past, depression or anxiety, these concerns may rise again while we're going through this difficult time. So again, it's just something to note when we're engaging with our community, with our colleagues, and with our students. And then lastly, with what I'm sharing with you, the idea of coping. Um, for some of us, in particular, I'll focus on our students not fully having the coping skills to manage these emotions. And so we've had students who have turned to alcohol and other substances to manage what they're feeling. We've gotten reports of people who are eating more than normal or engaging in other things to manage what they're feeling. So this is a way to avoid, I'd say, but also, people are doing their best to cope with what's happening, and they may not have the coping skills to manage at this point. So part of the work that, Regina and I do, along with the rest of the wellness team, is to teach our students coping skills so that they don't turn to unhealthy behaviors. So I'll pass this to Regina, who will talk more specifically about grief following the death of a loved one. Regina?
Thank you, Frank. Yeah, thank you, Frank. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the fact about shopping in your last bullet point. Shopping is a lot of Amazon in particular is pretty much capitalizing on the COVID situation right now. With a lot of advertisements offering these different sales, and you see it a lot on television where you have the typical Memorial Day sale, but there were many other sales now, and it just seems to be more important because the loss of routine of just going to the store to buy things or just going to the store to browse is impossible at this point, especially depending on where you live. So shopping in of itself is is definitely a loss, the loss of shopping as we know it and do more online shopping. But what do we feel with the grief after a death? Sometimes after a death or a loss of any kind, there's feelings of guilt. You regret not being with your loved one in their final moments. I personally had recently lost a close family member due to COVID, and she was in a nursing facility, and I was not able to be there during her last final moments. I was not able to see her um, as she was sick. I was not allowed to visit her, and it was very difficult. It's a very difficult thing. You feel like you could have done more. You should have done more, and it's hard because um, lot of times death is not going to allow you to do that. And the type of death that we're experiencing now is not going to allow you to be there. If you have been able to be there for someone who had passed, um, not grief over what you could have done more, or if there was anything that you could have done more to try to help the person. Lack of closure is next. Um, Part of the challenge with death is, one of the parts of closure in death is planning for a funeral or a wake. That is not, with COVID, that changed the pattern of being able to plan for a funeral. Um, a lot of funerals, because of the volume of death, with 2 to 3 weeks out. And especially if you were a person, if your loved one was someone who had died from the virus, you were not allowed to have a traditional wake, if you were Christian or Catholic or any of those faiths were awake, or a full service due to the risk of infection. So you're only allowed to have a funeral, and even at you even with the funeral, you may have been lucky if you were able to have more than 10 people be there, and you can't be in the room with them for a certain period of time. So just basic religious practices and getting together to hold a funeral, memorial, or any other type of religious service was thwarted or postponed due to the virus. And family members who may have been exposed themselves might have been quarantined and may not have been able to be there for you to support, or to be there for you to support the loved one's passing. Again, going back to what I was saying, part of lack of closure with lack of traditions. Traditions are usually typically designed to honor the deceased and offer emotional support to those who are grieving. The fact that people can't hold old traditions um, has been very difficult. Even with the loss of, or a death of a loved one, the loss is celebrating a birthday, um, especially for children. I have twin 5-year-old girls. Their birthday is coming up. Um, Unfortunately, I will not be able to have a birthday party in the traditional sense for them this year. So the new tradition is a drive-by birthday, where people come and drive by with their cars and honk horns and sing happy birthday to them in the cars in front of my house. So, it's replaced by another tradition that came about, but it's a loss of a tradition, a loss of, being able to celebrate a person's passing, celebrate a birthday, celebrate just celebrations in a sense. And last but not least, the feelings of isolation, being forced to grieve alone without an embrace of a friend, especially if you don't have family member, or if you're mainly alone and you don't have anybody that can sit to be there with you. Just a hug. Sometimes a hug means a lot, or to be held, or just to have the physical comfort of someone else, especially when you're grieving the loss of a loved one. Not being able to have that there um, is definitely a change in how we grieve, and a change in how we can cope with grieving. Um, it makes the process just that much more challenging for us when we are grieving the loss of a loved one, or anything at this time, or any type of loss that we're experiencing. Next slide, Frank. Part of grief, part of what we categorize in grief, there's many different theoretical perspectives. One very, very famous theoretical perspective is by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross on the stages of grief. And it consists of 6 different stages. Denial, which is the denial stage. You can't believe it, you're in shock, someone passed. Um, my God, the school is closing. I remember the day that they told us that I wasn't going to be able to hold my class that I teach in the evening anymore. I had to go in and tell my students. They were very much in shock and denial about it. Are you sure this is really happening? No, it just makes no sense. Um, but being in denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. It helps us to pace the shock. The denial almost serves as a protection for us to be able to pace out the beginning of our grief. Anger, um, feel deserted and abandoned. You know, so with someone if you knew someone who passed from the virus, for example, you're angry how does this disease can happen? Why didn't they wear a mask? Why couldn't they have done this? Um, as much as anger is there, it actually gives grief structure and it serves as a connection to the loss in being able to express the emotion of anger. Because you have the denial and then you have the anger of that losing that person and being able to process the coping of the death of that person or the death or loss of that routine that you might be used to. A bargaining stage. This is where you keep thinking you want to go back in time. If only I did this, or what if I pushed a little bit more to go see my aunt, for example, who was my family member who passed away. What if I pushed a little bit more? Um, what if I just tried to do this? Just different bargaining stages that you would have to go through to try to process the grief. You know, it's again, it's a form of coping in being able to process the grief. Then you have the depression, which is empty, you know, this is when it really hits you. You become depressed, you become sad, you become quiet. You really start to feel the loss. It's not a sign of mental illness per se, and it's a very much a normal and appropriate response to any type of loss that you are feeling with somebody. Um, and there's not much you can, you know, it's a very normal response to be able to process through that. Then once the depression hits, then you have acceptance, where the new reality is permanent. That you're not going to be able to change this loss. You're not going to be able to change this change in pattern in your life from old to new. Things are radically changed, and it's forever changed, and you must readjust yourself. And this is where you start to learn to readjust and figure out. And this is where you start to listen to your needs. And it's important to listen to your needs at this time. What do I do? How do I manage my needs? What is it that how can I move forward? And then last but not least is really um, finding meaning why this occurred. And this is where, for those of you who are spiritual or who have a belief system, this is where, you know, you pray and where individuals would pray and try to find meaning. And it gives grief a purpose and it helps to pass on lessons or memories in regards to being able to deal with the grief. Next slide, please. Just some examples again from what I mentioned before. For denial, some of the things you might hear, the virus won't affect me. And you see this a lot with we've seen this a lot with some of our students. I had one student that I was speaking with who was clearly sick, and I had to, you know, I was counseling him about, well, maybe he should go get tested or see his doctor. Oh, no, I'm not sick. I'm fine. The virus won't affect me. It was very much a denial stage there. Or things will be fine. You know, it's just a way of being able to manage with such a significant shock or change. Anger, you're making me stay home and taking away my activities. A lot of people have students are angry that they're taking online classes. A lot of people are angry that they're working from home. Some might be happy, but a lot of people are angry. I mean, globally, you see the anger ranging from people just defying wearing masks or defying the social norms. Um, People bargaining, another example. Okay, if I social distance for 2 weeks, everything will be better, right? Eh, you know, that's again, that's part of it. Is that really happening? No, really, the virus is in control, but this is a way for us to cope. Depression. I don't know when this is going to end, or I can't live like this are two common phrases that you might hear. This is the stage where people are really, it's beginning to sink in the impact of the virus, the impact of the situation. And then acceptance, this is happening. I can wash my hands. I can learn how to work virtually. Really, people being able to cope and work through what they need to do. And helping them find meaning is, you know, people connect virtually. They start making adjustments into their lives. And they try to contribute to the needs of others. And they try to reprioritize things that are there for them and there for themselves. Next slide. Coping in grief. Some of the tips by David Kessler in coping with grief is one is name it and claim it. It's very, very helpful to process your feelings and thoughts and words by keeping journals and putting words to the losses that you're experiencing at that time. And put words around a vague sense of your anxiety or suffering that you may not understand. While this is grief, and while we are experiencing grief, we're kind of experiencing what we call an ambiguous loss in a lot of ways, where the loss, we haven't lost touch. We haven't, a lot of us are still working, but we've lost the fact that we're not working in our office anymore, that we lost the fact that we're not connected with our colleagues and friends any longer. But we've lost the regular structure of our lives, and it's ambiguous when will we get that back. Because even though it's gone, we know it's not a permanent thing. So it's a matter of being able to manage with the loss at this time and the ambiguity of when that might change. Um, Emotions need motion. You feel it and it moves through you. Instead of, I feel sad, but I shouldn't feel that, other people have it worse. Allow yourself to experience the emotions. Don't try to suppress the emotions. Um, this is a very emotional time for us. Rather than denying it or repressing the emotion, you want to be able to process it. So instead of, I feel sad, but I shouldn't feel that, try, I feel sad. Let me go for 5 minutes for feel sad. Again, allow yourself to experience the emotion. And last, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Um, in this quote, pain is really defined as a physical sensation with your body in relation to an event or situation. A lot of time when we grieve, we feel pain, emotional pain, physical pain. Um, Suffering really becomes more, rather than the physical suffering from the physical pain, it becomes more the story that you tell yourself about the pain. And it's more about your thoughts, your judgments, or your beliefs in regards to the pain, in regards to what you're experiencing. And our tendency as humans, we try to fix the grief, but you're not really broken. The grief doesn't mean that you are broken. The grief doesn't mean that you, there's a fallacy within you if you're feeling grief. It's a reaction to the condition of the situation, whether it's a loss of a loved one, whether you're reacting to the change in the environment now that we're quarantined. It's all in regards to being able to navigate this grief. Next slide, please. Some more coping with grief tricks, both by David Kessler and Dr. Kristen Neff, is really find balance in your thoughts. If you feel the worst image taking shape, make yourself think of the best image. And this is done a lot. We've utilized this a lot through guided imagery, and really helping to refocus your thoughts from the worst possible thoughts and negatives, like the worst possible thought. Or if I go outside, I'm going to get the virus, so I got to stay in. I can't go take a walk. I got to lock myself up. Um, the best image is, in the sense, what you want to do is reframe that to the best image. Well, if I wear a mask and protect myself, then I'm able to go out. I'm able to go outside and maybe take a walk, but with safety. Second would be come into the present. Here, meditation guided imagery is very important to you come help you with grounding, different breathing techniques to center yourself, mindfulness techniques. Again, meditation is very important. Meditation, even if it's for 5-10 minutes a day, um, practicing a guided meditation can really help focus and center you. NYC Well has a telephone and some free information. The Wellness Center website, we have some actual links to guided meditations and some information on free apps that you can download. Calm, for one, is an excellent app that you can download on the computer. So you want to be able to make yourself accessible about with that and really try some different mindfulness techniques. Next is let go of what you can't control. You can't control others, but you can stay safe and be at home. Allow yourself to stay safe. Allow yourself to accept the fact that the best place you can be right now is at home. The best place you can be right now is to be safe. If you have to go out, whether it to be a store, if you have to go out, whether to grieve or to go to a burial, or, especially if someone who has passed, make sure that you protect yourself and use the right protective gear. I call it the face mask and the gloves and hand sanitizers, and just be safe and try to stay safe. But if you can stay home, try to stay home. Know that that's something you can control. By staying home, you can control the spread of this disease. And last but not least is to practice self-compassion. There is, you want to be compassionate to yourself, be empathetic to yourself. There is a thing, self-kindness versus self-judgment. A lot of times it goes back to, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. And then you focus on the negative. You want to be kind to yourself during this time. It says it's okay to feel stressed. This is a difficult period in time. And also to understand that what you're experiencing is what others are experiencing. So this is a sense of common humanity. And really to think of it that way, then you don't feel like you're the only one going through this, and you would combat the isolation that you might feel. Um, and again, you also want to be mindful about to really practice mindfulness again. Mindfulness is very, very important, um, because it's really versus over the over-identification with the negativity and the negative reactivity of what's going on in the world around us. There's so many news reports, different conflicting news reports, different conflicting news bites, um, where we're hearing different things online and over the internet. I constantly get messages about this or about that, about who did this with the virus or that, with the virus. So are we reopening or are we not reopening? Um, don't try to turn it off. It's hard to turn off those apps. It's hard to turn off those news channels. Just try to turn it off and to keep yourself centered in the present and centered on your needs and centered on what you need to do. The next slide. So the last is, again, coping with grief, is really practicing self-care. Um, Healthy eating and staying hydrated and getting enough rest is important. Um, Healthy eating, being at home, sometimes we may tend to snack more than what we usually are used to. So if you're going to snack, try to buy healthier snacks, or or try not to order for delivery. Stay hydrated, drink a lot of water, and really get enough rest. Is to time yourself with your clock. Try not to do work late at night. I have a bad habit of doing that, like I did last night. So it's really being mindful that when, to try to do the work in the time that you're scheduled during the day. And then after that, really just closing the computer. Um, Being on the computer, believe it or not, can actually biologically stimulate the dopamine levels in your brain. So you want to take yourself away from blue light, the phone, the computer, the laptop, whatever, anything that, television, anything that radiates that blue light, to get your eyes away from it a half an hour before you fall asleep, because it can stimulate you to stay up. You also want to look at increasing your resilience. Really think about, how did you cope and persevere in the past with different losses, whether it be loss of a family member prior to this whole COVID situation. Um, really have confidence in yourself, have confidence in your strength and abilities. This feeling's not going to last forever. This is a temporary situation, even though it feels like it's never going away. It's a very much a temporary situation. And we're going to get through this. I keep thinking of Governor Cuomo's anthem, we're stronger, we're tough New Yorkers, and we're strong and tough, and we're all strong and tough, and that's, keep reminding yourself of that. Make modifications in your life. Again, you might not be at 100% due to your own stress and grief right now, and stress with adjustment, and also stress with doing things at home, and just stress with managing not only work but home life. And if you have children, like I have children, managing school at home. I've become a kindergarten teacher in the last 2 months for my twin girls, and that's been really interesting, to say the least. So in order to do that, you got to really be flexible. And so make small changes to your daily tasks and schedule. Try to balance out your time. Again, really time management and balance is very important, and making modifications to that is very, very important. And last but not least, reach out to family and friends. It may not be in person, but if it's on the phone, even virtual, it doesn't, you know, physical distance doesn't mean emotional distance. Grieving alone increases the suffering. If you really feel like you need to talk to somebody about losing your loved one or family member, reach out to them. I mean, I have my sister lives in Florida. I have cousins that live in upstate New York and out of state. Um, we all talked online about the loss I experienced, and it was very helpful. They may not have been able to be there physically there, for all the arrangements and stuff, but they the fact that they were there virtually and just there emotionally support, it really helps helped with the grieving process. Talking with your friends, I even, coming back to work and just being with my colleagues at work definitely helped with processing the grief that I was experiencing for myself. And then I think the last piece, which Frank is a
Hmm.
quote, and I think, I'm going to turn it over to you, Frank, because you got a great reading voice for this. So
Thank you,
you're
Christina.
welcome.
So the last slide here is a quote that we chose to sort of help summarize what we've discussed today. This is a moment of suffering, and suffering is a part of life. Let me be kind to myself in this moment. Let me give myself the compassion I need. So just this idea that, again, this is a first for all of us, and that what we're going through is unprecedented, and there's no sort of guidebook to get through this. But the idea is that suffering is suffering, and that it is important to be kind to yourself during this time in order to get through it. And so we will transition here. We have a few minutes to here to take any questions that you might have. So I will open it up to our three guests, it looks like now. Does anyone have any questions? You could either say it out loud, or you could note it in the chat feature.
Or comment if you don't have any questions.
Mhm.
Hi, this is Shari.
Hi,
I
Sharon.
just I just wanted to say thank you. I don't have any questions per se about what you guys presented, but this was much needed, especially at this time. I think we all have lost someone that we know or a close one, and sorry for your losses. But I think it's important to know how to cope, because it's true. I've lost some church. Members of my church have passed away, and we're not able to do a service for them or something like that. But we do stay in contact. Like my church has we use band apps, and that's very helpful because that's how we've been doing church. That's how my pastor's been doing church with us every Sunday. So we're still connected in some sort of way. So I think that's been helping all of us. Uh, but I thank you guys very much for this.
For the feedback. Yeah, we really appreciate that. I think you make a good point too. Early on, I was fortunate. My wife works for a tech company, and so she made me aware of what's called Slack. It's basically an IM messaging system where you're able to, um, communicate with your colleagues through an IMing system. And it's really, I think it's really, and I don't know how you feel, Regina, but it's really made a difference in terms of staying connected.
Yes.
Um, because again, otherwise, if you don't connect with your colleagues throughout the day, you can start to feel more isolated. So
Oh, definitely. It definitely has made it. And it's not only just like it's a messaging system. You could have your own little rooms and you could set little groups. So it's really great. And it's a way to communicate. It's really a great way to communicate with everybody. It really is. It's really great.
What is it called again? Slack, you said?
It's called
Slack.
Slack,
Yeah.
yeah.
Slack? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's a
I think
free.
someone mentioned something on the chat.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's free. It's really great. I have found it really helpful to quickly communicate with someone as opposed to emailing them and then waiting for a response back. Any other questions or comments?
No, it meant said she says for whatever reason you're not able to hear me. I was given this meeting information from my friend Renisha LaGuardia. In the LaGuardia Economic Affairs office. She works at City Tech and she just lost her mother last week. This is very helpful. We're very sorry for your loss, Rena. I know this is a very difficult time. Our thoughts and prayers are with you. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for finding time to be here.
So if there aren't any other questions or comments, we will end here. And on behalf of Regina and myself and the Wellness Center, we thank you for participating in our forum. I'll just mention that there is another forum this Friday at 2 p.m. that is sponsored by the Wellness Center, Human Resources, and our EAP program, Dear Oaks. Bonnie, the title of the forum escapes me. I think it's how to handle difficult.
How to handle stress under difficult circumstances.
Correct. Yeah. So if you are available to attend that forum, I highly encourage you do so. Just some more great information that you could use while we're working from home. And also you could share it with your colleagues and if you're working with students with them as well. So I thank you all for your time and we hope to see you all soon on campus in the near future. Have a good rest of the day, everyone.
Stay
Thank you.
safe, everybody. Thank you for
Thank you.
being here.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Bye bye.